I'm Henson. You can probably see that I'm not Emma Bolchin. Just to clarify that. Emma unfortunately isn't very well today, so I've stepped in to lead this webinar today. I'm the Director of Policy at the National Governance Association. And it's great to be here to continue on our series on virtual governance. And this session today, we're really looking at monitoring and board reporting amid a global pandemic. And hopefully it will be a great opportunity for me to share some of the shared practice that we know is going on the ground from what you've already told us. I really hope that you'll find some value in today's session. So I'm just going to, let me just, there you go, sorry. So today I really want to cover three key areas, looking at the immediate priorities for this term and beyond, thinking about our monitoring activity, thinking about what board reporting looks like during the pandemic, and also thinking about our monitoring plans going forward, particularly around how it's been affected by COVID-19, thinking about remote education and everything that's gone with it as well. Just to flag up, the NGA has released guidance on governing virtually, and we've added to that today with our new monitoring information sheet. So that really goes hand in hand with today's session. So do have a look at that on the website after we finished today. Just a bit of general housekeeping. We're pushed for time, it's just half an hour, so do stick with me. We've got a lot to cover. If you do have questions, then please email me directly at sam.henson@nga.org.uk. I'd love to connect with you in relation to this, and happy to answer questions, and would also really be interested to hear your feedback in relation to what you're doing for your monitoring as well. So let's begin the session. I wanted to start off really by thinking about what monitoring means, thinking about the definition of monitoring. So I've put that here, and also just wanted to look, just kind of reflect for a moment around why we do monitoring, how we can do it, and perhaps some of the challenges as well. And this quote here, you'll see, kind of really brings our attention to the fact that within any setting, but particularly schools, there is so much stuff for us to be keeping an eye on. Actually, sometimes it can be quite overwhelming. I'm sure many of us have felt that over recent months. And actually, we can't monitor everything. We can't keep an eye on everything. And so there is part of our strategic role, I think, is for us to have that conversation around what are we going to prioritize. And probably over recent months, more than ever, we've been going back to the boardroom and having this conversation about what are we going to prioritize now at this point in time. Now, I think it's worth saying and reflecting here that some have challenged the idea of monitoring as a concept for the future of governance, that it sort of perhaps feels a bit old school, but I would debate that. I think governance is not doable without it. I think that we do need to pick and choose wisely what we're monitoring, what we're looking at, but now more than ever, there is a key role for us in our monitoring responsibilities. We can't and we shouldn't attempt to monitor everything, but we can monitor well despite the restrictions on us at the moment. And I want to unpick some of that in the session with you today. We monitor against what we've agreed is our strategic priorities, against our vision setting, and the governing board and the senior executive leaders, I think, really need to come together at this point in time, if you haven't done already, to think about what are the detailed arrangements for your monitoring at the moment, and what do they need to be, what do they need to look like. It's important that governors and trustees think clearly, think strategically about the data that they need, the information that they need going forwards in light of what has been a huge change for all of us. And we need to ask ourselves what is important to know about now to make sure that we know our school, that we know our trust, we know our organisation. How is this balanced against the demands on our leaders' time, both in terms of their overall workload and their time as well? So just wanted to think about virtual monitoring and thinking about giving you a snapshot around how this links to virtual governance overall. I think it's worth saying here that what we've seen over recent months, that with the right preparation, it is relatively easy for boards to hold a productive virtual meeting. You know, there's lots of you that have told us that virtual meetings have taken place via video conference or through an online platform or even via phone if needed, and it's working. Now, perhaps taking our virtual monitoring a step further is more of a challenge, and that's one that we are going to look at today and hopefully unpick. I think I wanted to start off just by saying I don't think the answer is for us to kind of operate under a very kind of email heavy model. I think that's something we need to be particularly careful, and running throughout this session today is one thing I'll come back to is being very much aware of the workload and responsibility that our executive leaders are carrying at the moment, and just them keeping up to date with everything through numerous emails, I think is a huge challenge. And I also think if we conduct a lot of our monitoring responsibilities and a lot of our governance business in general purely via email, then you know, we can lose track of others' contributions. So I think it's a vehicle for supporting us, but it's not in itself the answer. So actually, you know, I think when we're thinking about having catching up with staff that we need to in respect to a particular area that we have are monitoring under our responsibilities as a governor, then actually a conversation is really key to that. Monitoring the what? So this list here is something that we've been collating from what you've told us, and is a direct key priority for you at the moment for what governing boards are focused on at the moment. This also corresponds with what we know has come through the department and Ofsted as well. And these are things that actually, if we look across the spectrum right now, these are the things that we need to be thinking about. It's not an exhaustive list. There may well be other things that you're currently monitoring. Hopefully this will cover the majority of them. But it's worth saying that governing boards have been assessing the impact that lockdown and partial closures has had for some time now, and it has likely led for all of us to a reframing of our strategic priorities, and that has then led to a reframing of what we are monitoring going forwards. And many of us have already had a discussion where the board and the school leaders identify revised priorities. We've asked ourselves, does it change the vision, the strategic direction, the operational plans of how to get there? We've been asking, you know, are our governance arrangements right? Are they supporting what we need to do right now at this specific moment in time? There's lots of questions that I think that we can be asking as a board, as a collective, that should form part of this monitoring discussion. All the while, our attention needs to be tuned to how we maintain productivity and efficiency and effectiveness as a governing board. Yeah, I think that that's really key for us. Remote governance doesn't mean invisible governance, and this, for those of you who remember, NGA launched its visible governance campaign back in February before we then had to put a halt to it due to COVID breaking out. But we will be relaunching that campaign. But I just wanted to say something about this specifically, in that I do think for us to get monitoring right, we have to have visibility, and that is visibility with staff, visibility with parents, visibility with pupils, visibility across the school community, across the organisation, across the trust, wherever we govern. You know, given the value that school governance adds to school improvement, to the sector overall, we need to ensure that governance develops its rightful status within the education system right now. And obviously, many of you will be thinking, well, that's clearly your job, NGA, and you're right. That's one thing that we are doing, but I think it's something we can all do in our own individual contexts as well. More than ever, governance, I think, should be recognised, should be utilised, and should not become something that is ignored until things go wrong. You know, governance has been at the forefront of what's been going on, and we need to keep it there. And so therefore, people need to understand what we're here to do. That will aid our monitoring responsibilities. The choice of what to measure, what to monitor, needs to be guided by our values and vision, and that rests firmly with us, and that was outlined in our school strategy. But in reality, these will, you know, all be top priorities for us right now, won't they? And it needs to be clear that the board has an essential, pivotal, core function in setting the vision, and our monitoring responsibilities are key for making sure we get there. So how do we maintain visibility in a remote landscape? Well, clearly there are challenges. The discussion and subsequent recovery plan should not result in a total overhaul of the school trust improvement plan or the governing board's strategic plan, I don't think. Some of you may disagree, but I do think we need to adapt, we need to change in light of what's happened. And these discussions have been taking place alongside a part of our annual cycle of governance already this year. You know, we're already in November. The academic year is really passing by quite quickly. So what we've seen is that as you know, school life has continued and education has continued, so too governing has continued, but it's adapted, it looks different, and we've changed the way we do things. But I do think a key thing to maintaining our visibility and using that to aid our monitoring responsibilities at this moment in time is to come back to how we communicate with stakeholders and how we manage information, how we use information as well. Carrying out visits, clearly, you know, is something that we can't do at the moment, or not many of us can do. Meeting staff, pupils and stakeholders, you know, these are all things that are fundamental aspects to our governance journeys and to knowing our school. But for now, at least, we've had to do things slightly differently, and those monitoring conversations have had to adapt, but they've still been taking place, and that's the key thing. And monitoring conversations can and must still take place. They help the governing board understand how issues discussed at board level translate into everyday school life. So they're really, really key. The changing face of monitoring then, actually, I think going forwards, looking beyond right now and looking to next year, hopefully when the situation is getting a bit brighter, there'll be new challenges around how we do governance going forwards. And the challenges brought about by reduced in-person contact can be overcome to an extent by school staff and governing boards working together to implement a virtual monitoring policy, a virtual monitoring program. But ultimately, what would be great is we end up in a position where we have a blended approach where we take the best of both worlds, where we meet virtually in some instances, and that might make certain activities easier and more effective. It might help out with our stakeholder engagement. It might help out with perhaps where you've struggled to get people visiting. It does open certain doors for the future, but I don't think it, in itself, it can be the complete answer. We need to take the best of both worlds. And as we embrace the opportunities of having a virtual monitoring program, we also need to be aware of the ongoing issues, the ongoing challenges that it presents. The good thing is this embrace, if you like, of virtual governance, I think, has meant that we are genuinely much more open to doing things differently. And because we've had to, and I know that's been difficult, and it is difficult. It's still hard now, but it does mean, as we've adapted, we've accepted that the way that we govern, our priorities, the information we have, the format we assess it, has had to change. And we've been forced to ride a wave of change, an evolving landscape of how governance is and can be done. So we embrace those opportunities, but we're also aware of the challenges, the issues. The quality is better than quantity. I do think sometimes we've been bombarded with so much information, just in the way that our executive leaders have been bombarded with guidance after guidance from the department, and there's been so much stuff out there. Actually, it's been hard to really take a step back and really think about what is the information we really need to get our monitoring right, and that's been tricky. There are those challenges, but we need to look at what works, what doesn't work, that blended approach that's on the horizon, and really grasp that and go with it. So what does this mean for our board reporting then? Well, let's think about how our board reporting has worked, is going to work going forwards. The way things have been reported to us may not have changed that much, although certainly what is being reported has. And our virtual monitoring program needs to consider the workload implications for staff, and that means having pragmatic conversations with school leaders about what a practical and appropriate board reporting and monitoring approach looks like, considering the school's COVID-19 control measures. It's also important to have these conversations regularly as the situation evolves. The needs around information being reported has been constantly changing and adapting. And I know where I govern in my trust, we've had quite a few strategy meetings. We had one in August, we had one in September, we had one the other day, and they've been really important, actually, where we've been able to take that step back and really think about what we need as a board, and that, I think that's really key. As boards strive to balance support and challenge, all governors and trustees need to understand that the ground rules and the expectations for virtual monitoring have been very much thrust upon us, and we've had to ask ourselves if we're getting it right, if we're getting the level of detail right, and I think it's fine that it's taken a bit of time sometimes, but it's just remembering that actually, just because we've started doing it one way at the beginning of the academic year, we don't have to stick to it. We need to be open if things aren't working, and I think that's particularly key in terms of what is being reported to us from our executives. It's really hard. It's a hard conversation, I think, sometimes to say to your head teacher, to your CEO, that actually, we're getting this information and it's not working for us. We need it in a different format. We need to look at it differently. But actually, essentially, if it's going to save them time, it's going to save you time. It's the right decision. So let's have those conversations. Board reporting. The minimum requirements, I've listed some of them here. Hopefully, these won't come as a surprise to you. You'll be very familiar with these. I would argue that some things have remained consistent. We want RAG rating systems for our strategy document. We want to know where we are in terms of our performance. Are we where we want to be? Are we getting regular information on resourcing the organisation, information on costings and specific improvements of interventions, for example? Do we know that these things are working? If we're not getting the information to us in a regular and clear way, then it's really hard for us to monitor what we're doing. But all of that needs to be clearly contextualized against the current backdrop, and we need to be supportive of our leaders as well as they're battling against that on a daily basis. And I've already said that, but I think the role of the head teacher, the role of the CEO, has very much become a 7-day-a-week job if it wasn't already before. And it's something that we need to be incredibly aware of, being on guard against the challenges of that presents. But there are other challenges, I think, in terms of board reporting. Like I was saying before, sometimes we're not getting it in the right format for us. Sometimes we're just getting way too much stuff. Sometimes we're not willing as a board to look at doing things differently. And I think that's a really key conversation as well, particularly if you're in a board where you've all been in place for a long time. Just because you completely understand the way things are reported, you get it, it's aiding you in your monitoring responsibilities. Actually, are you sure that everyone on the board understands it? It may well be that there are some people on the board who are afraid to speak up because they just don't quite get the way things are being presented, and so we need to have that conversation. So at NGA, we're very much big advocates of the concept of triangulation, which is nothing new. It's been around for years and years and years, and many of you will have seen this slide before. It's one that we've used before, and I've highlighted there in red some of the things that we've got to do slightly differently at the moment. So those things have changed. Doesn't mean they're stopping. For visits, we can do them to an extent virtually. We can still have virtual events if we need to. There are things we can do, but there is also a swathe of other information that we can access, that we can use, that will aid us in our monitoring role. On a practical level, we just got to figure out how monitoring works without visits, without doing the things that we've perhaps got very used to doing. But the framework we're following is largely the same. We're working collaboratively with our executive leaders to essentially to ascertain what needs to be in place for us to go forwards, and that means all the while we're focused on our strategy, and we're bringing everything back to that. So in terms of board reports and data, essentially we want to be thinking about the format and making sure that it meets the needs of our boards, and when all sources are used together, when we look at all of these, that we're in a much stronger position. And I guess there is a danger that for some boards, they might have got very used to kind of being thrust a load of information at quite a high speed over the last 9 months, that it's been very easy to take to be more reliant on the word of our heads and our executives. But there is still a need for us to use other sources of evidence to back up what is being said. And when all sources have been used, that evidence, it will either assure us that what we're being told is right, or it will give us the means of providing extra challenge where we need to, which is really key. So just a bit on remote learning. These are the things that you've told us are the things that you've been thinking about in terms of remote learning, the challenges, the questions. Again, not an exhaustive list. There will be others. All schools have delivered some form of remote education in the summer term, and many over the autumn term as well. Many year groups have been sent home, bubbles have been sent home. Schools have continued to be shut. My son's actually gone back to school today after being at home for a week and a half because his whole school was shut. So that this is still happening, and those experiences should continue to be used to build plans for the rest of the academic year. And I saw that very much in practice. the difference this time, the learning provided to my son. He was much more engaged. He really enjoyed it. It was a pleasure to see him kind of wanting to get up and learn. Whereas I think during lockdown, kind of number one, it was kind of slightly different, and that he was much more reliant on myself and my wife, and that's not a good place for him to be honest. So actually, I think seeing the way that his remote education had adapted, had changed, the what is on offer now, we're in a totally different place to where we were in March. But let's not forget the huge amount of progress there has been. No other industry would make that kind of progress in such a short space of time. So I think that's a real credit to our teachers, to the sector overall. Just such a positive thing. So just thinking about our priorities that we can recommend to you for your monitoring. This is very much taken from the new information sheet that I mentioned that NGA has produced, which is broken down into 4 key areas: risk management, safeguarding, well-being across the school community, continuity of education, and resource management. So do have a look at that information sheet. It's got questions that you can ask for each one. It gives you direction for how you go about monitoring those specific items. But I think if we're maintaining a strong focus on these, then we're heading in the right direction. And these are clearly huge discussions that are taking place for all of us at the moment. Just as I start to kind of wind things together, the reality of monitoring in COVID-19 in COVID-19 era has been interesting for all of us. For the time being, governing boards will be maintaining a strategic overview of their school, of their trust, and their plans for ensuring that as many pupils can simply return to school each week safely, which looking back a year ago, that's a crazy place for us to be, but that's the reality of it. And it comes back to that 7-day-a-week role that I was talking about for heads and staff earlier. I say each week because each week looks differently at the moment, and anything can happen. And I would argue our monitoring activity has never been more essential, and we can only do it well with the right access to the data needed to monitor outcomes in the strategy, but recognizing that data is rapidly changing as well. So let's have those conversations with our staff in any way we can, but also remembering we can apply the same protocols we would have done for visits, just using them virtually. So those conversations need to be pre-planned, or the head needs to be aware of that. They need to be linked to that strategic conversation. We need to find a way of reporting it back to the board, of sharing that information, doing something with it. I think that's really key. So just to finish off, just thought this is a really interesting way of sharing with you what we've been told from members around who's been in school, who hasn't, and as you can see, the majority haven't. Almost just under a quarter have. But the picture is clearly changing, and a lot of people would have been visiting before lockdown 2 started, and obviously I know schools are still open this time, but more people are staying at home again, so the picture may well have changed. But one thing I wanted to really kind of focus on to wrap this up really it was about the connection we have with our stakeholders and the key part of our monitoring role that plays. The connection that governing boards has with their school community is more vital than ever before. When visits are not possible, governing boards need to find new ways of engaging with the stakeholders, new ways of engaging with pupils, with staff, with parents and carers. You know, just because we can't go and see them physically doesn't mean we can't hear from them. You know, there might be virtual meetings that we can put together. There might be virtual meetings that the school is already having that the governors and trustees could join. Governors could make themselves visible at school events that are being held virtually, such as assemblies or you know, parents evening, whatever. There's ways of doing this. Yeah, I think that that we need to find ways of harnessing the voice of our stakeholders to really equip our monitoring role. You know, if we're not hearing from the people who are meant to be benefiting most from our organisations, our pupils, then it's really hard to know how well we are on target with our strategic aims and realising our vision. So regardless of how boards decide to interact with their school community, I think the key thing is that they need to ensure that their stakeholders can continue to make their voices heard, and to shape the discussion with the board meetings and inform decision making as well. So that is really kind of the main content of what I wanted to say. There's some tips here on this slide of things that we can all consider. I'm sure you know many of you have already done so much of this already. I just want to really finish off just by saying, you know, as I mentioned, my own son's experience recently with his school, just so aware of the huge collective effort going on from our volunteers at the moment across the country. And you know, it's such a pleasure, such a joy to be a part of that. Family have connected into that, and you know, I just want to thank you all for doing such an amazing job. There are huge challenges ahead for all of us, but NJ are really really keen to hear your feedback on what you're doing. So don't let this be the end of the conversation. Tell us what you're doing to monitor, to fulfill your monitoring responsibilities. We want to keep that going, that dialogue going. So yeah, just thank you so much for joining me today. Appreciate it's a very quick whistle stop tour of this topic. There's so much to say, but hopefully we've covered some really key matters of importance there. And yeah, do speak to us and engage with us. And I wish you all a good rest of the week, good weekend. And also a happy Christmas, because we're not that far away. We've actually got the Christmas tree up already downstairs, again, because my son bullied me into that. So yeah, really looking forward to seeing you all face to face at some point in the not too distant future, hopefully. Thank you very much.